Dean Martin made the bet on live television in front of 15 million viewers. "Carson, you sophisticated talk show host, I bet you can't handle real drinking." The audience loved it. Classic Dean. Always the life of the party, always with a drink in hand, always making everyone laugh. But Johnny Carson didn't laugh. Instead, he looked directly into Dean's eyes and said 5 words that changed everything. "I accept, but different rules." The audience went silent. Dean's smile froze, because Dean suddenly realized this wasn't about a bet anymore, and what happened over the next 3 days would either kill Dean Martin or save him. It was October 15th, 1973, at NBC's Studio One in Burbank, California. The Tonight Show was in full swing, and Dean Martin had just walked onto the stage with that famous swagger everyone recognized. He was 56 years old, still handsome, still charismatic. But if you looked closely, you could see the signs. His hands trembled slightly when he wasn't holding a glass. His eyes were a bit too glassy. His laugh came a fraction of a second too late, like he was processing everything through a fog. Johnny Carson watched his old friend settle into the guest chair and felt his heart break a little. They'd known each other for over 20 years, had performed together countless times, had shared stages and stories and secrets. But lately, every time Dean appeared on the show, Johnny noticed the decline. The drinking that used to be part of Dean's comedic persona had become something darker, something desperate. The audience was having a great time. Dean was telling stories about the Rat Pack days, about Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr., about the wild nights in Vegas. Everyone was laughing. But Johnny wasn't really listening to the words. He was watching Dean reach for the glass on the side table. It was the 4th time in 10 minutes. Each sip was a little longer than the last. "You know what your problem is, Johnny?" Dean said suddenly, his words slightly slurred. "You're too buttoned up, too controlled. You need to loosen up." He raised his glass. "Have a real drink with me, not that watered-down stuff they give you. Real whiskey." The audience laughed, thinking it was part of the bit. Johnny smiled, but his mind was racing. 3 days ago, he'd received that phone call from Deana Martin, Dean's daughter. She'd been sobbing. "Uncle Johnny, we don't know what to do anymore. He's drinking 2 bottles a day. The doctors say his liver's failing. He won't listen to us. He just laughs it off and pours another drink." Johnny had promised her he would try something, anything. But he hadn't told her what he was planning because he knew she'd beg him not to do it. What Johnny was about to do could backfire spectacularly. It could humiliate Dean, could destroy their friendship, could make things worse. But Johnny had watched too many friends destroy themselves. He'd attended too many funerals of people who everyone said were fine until they weren't. "Dean," Johnny said, his voice taking on a different tone, "I'll take that bet, but like I said, different rules." Dean laughed, but there was uncertainty in his eyes now. "What kind of rules?" "We drink," Johnny said clearly, making sure his words carried to every corner of the studio. "But we drink honestly. No jokes, no act, no pretending. Just 2 friends talking about what drinking really means." The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the fun, lighthearted banter they were used to. Ed McMahon, sitting at his desk off to the side, looked concerned. The director in the booth was frantically trying to figure out if he should cut to commercial. Dean's smile had completely disappeared. "Johnny, what are you doing?" "I'm being your friend," Johnny said quietly. "When was the last time you went a full day without a drink, Dean?" The studio was dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Dean's face went through several emotions: anger, embarrassment, defensiveness. "That's not funny, Johnny." "I'm not trying to be funny," Johnny replied. "I'm trying to save your life. Because if someone doesn't say something, we're going to lose you. And I'm not okay with that." Dean stood up abruptly. "I don't need this. I came here to do a show, not to be ambushed." "Sit down, Dean," Johnny said firmly. "It wasn't a request. Please, sit down." Dean hesitated. The cameras were still rolling. 15 million people were watching. He could walk off, could make a scene, could play the victim. But something in Johnny's eyes stopped him. It was the same look Dean had seen decades ago when they were both young comedians trying to make it, when they'd made a pact to always tell each other the truth, even when it hurt. Slowly, Dean sat back down. His hands were shaking badly now. "How much are you drinking?" Johnny asked gently. Dean looked away. That's nobody's business. Your daughter called me 3 days ago. She was crying so hard she could barely speak. She said you're up to 2 bottles a day. She said the doctors have given you 6 months if you don't stop. The audience gasped. This was real. This wasn't scripted. This was a man trying to save his friend's life on national television. Dean's face crumpled. Johnny, don't do this. Not here. Not like this. Where else, Dean? You won't take your family's calls. You fired your last doctor. You're canceling appearances. You're disappearing into a bottle, and we're all just supposed to smile and pretend it's part of the act? Johnny leaned forward. I love you too much to pretend anymore. Tears started rolling down Dean's face. The camera zoomed in, capturing every moment. It was brutal and raw and completely unplanned. You think I don't know? Dean whispered. You think I don't feel it killing me? I just don't know how to stop. Johnny's own eyes filled with tears. Then let us help you. Let me help you, right now, tonight. How? Dean asked, his voice broken. I've tried. God knows I've tried. But every time I try to quit, everything hurts. My hands shake. I can't sleep. The anxiety is unbearable. So I have 1 drink to take the edge off, and then it's 2, and then it's the whole bottle, and then I wake up, and I've lost another day. The audience was crying now. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was watching a man's soul laid bare, watching someone admit to demons that had been eating him alive. I called a doctor, Johnny said. He's backstage right now. Dr. Robert Morrison. He specializes in addiction. He's helped dozens of performers get clean. He can help you, but you have to say yes. Right here, right now, in front of all these people. Because I know you, Dean. If we don't do this publicly, you'll walk out of here tonight and convince yourself you can handle it alone. And you can't. None of us can handle this alone. Dean looked at the audience, at the cameras, at Johnny. You're really doing this? You're really staging an intervention on The Tonight Show? I'm really doing this, Johnny confirmed, because losing you is not an option. Because your kids need their father. Because the world needs Dean Martin, the real Dean Martin. Not this shadow who's drowning in whiskey. Dean was silent for a long moment. Then he looked at Johnny and said the words that would change everything. Okay, yes, I'll do it. I'll get help. The audience erupted in applause. Not the polite sitcom applause, but genuine, emotional, supportive applause. People were standing. Some were openly weeping. Ed McMahon was wiping his eyes. Dr. Morrison came out from backstage. He was a calm, professional man in his 50s. He shook Dean's hand. Mr. Martin, I'm glad you're ready. We're going to start tonight. I have a facility in Malibu. Beautiful place right on the ocean. We'll get you through detox safely, and then we'll work on keeping you sober, 1 day at a time. Dean nodded, looking dazed. Right now? Tonight? Right now, Dr. Morrison confirmed. If you're serious about this, we need to move while you're ready. Johnny stood up and embraced his friend. The cameras captured it all. You're going to be okay, Johnny whispered. I promise you're going to be okay. Dean pulled back and looked at the audience. I'm sorry you all had to see this. I'm sorry I let it get this bad. An older woman in the front row stood up. We love you, Dean. Go get better. Soon, the entire audience was on their feet, showing support. Dean Martin, the man who'd spent his entire career making people laugh, stood on the Tonight Show stage and cried. But these weren't tears of despair anymore. They were tears of relief. The show cut to commercial, but the cameras kept rolling. What happened next was captured but never aired publicly. Dr. Morrison led Dean off the stage. Johnny walked with them all the way to the car waiting outside. Before Dean got in, he turned to Johnny one more time. Why did you do it this way? Dean asked. Why in front of everyone? Johnny's answer was simple and profound. Because I knew you wouldn't let 15 million people down. You'd let yourself down. You'd let your family down, but you wouldn't let America down. I made it impossible for you to back out. Dean understood. You sneaky bastard. I learned from the best, Johnny said with a small smile. Dean Martin checked into the Malibu facility that night. The detox was brutal. For 3 days, he shook and sweated and vomited and wanted to die. But he didn't drink. Dr. Morrison and his team kept him safe through the worst of it. On the 4th day, Dean's hands stopped shaking. On the 7th day, he slept through the night without nightmares. On the 14th day, he called his daughter Dina and apologized for everything. He stayed at the facility for 60 days. During that time, Johnny visited twice a week. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat together in silence. Johnny never told the press where Dean was. He just told them that Dean was taking some time for his health, which was technically true. When Dean finally came home, he was different, clearer, present. He still had the charm and the charisma, but now there was something else there too. Authenticity, vulnerability, strength. 3 months after the intervention, Dean returned to The Tonight Show. The audience gave him a 5-minute standing ovation before he even sat down. Johnny didn't make jokes about it. He just asked the question everyone wanted to know. "How are you doing, Dean?" Dean looked directly into the camera. "I'm 93 days sober, and it's the hardest thing I've ever done. But it's also the best thing I've ever done. I can remember conversations now. I can be present with my kids. I can look at myself in the mirror without shame." He turned to Johnny. "And I owe it all to this man, who loved me enough to risk everything, who staged an intervention on national television because he knew it was the only way to break through my denial." Johnny shook his head. "You did the work, Dean. You made the choice. But you gave me the push," Dean insisted. "You made it impossible for me to say no, and I'm grateful. Every single day, I'm grateful." The two friends embraced, and this time both of them were crying. But they were happy tears, healing tears. Dean Martin stayed sober for the rest of his life. He lived another 22 years after that intervention, years he got to spend with his children and grandchildren, years he got to perform with clarity and passion, years he wouldn't have had if Johnny Carson hadn't taken that enormous risk. Other celebrities reached out to Johnny after the episode aired. Some criticized him for ambushing Dean so publicly, but many more thanked him. They said watching Dean's intervention gave them the courage to address their own demons. Alcoholics. Anonymous groups across the country reported a surge in new members. The episode, though controversial, started a national conversation about addiction and the importance of intervention. Johnny never apologized for what he did. In a later interview, he explained his reasoning simply. "Dean was dying. Everyone could see it except Dean. Someone had to do something, and I was in a position to do it. Could I have handled it privately? Maybe. But would it have worked? I don't think so. Dean needed accountability. He needed to make a promise he couldn't break, and he needed to know that his struggle wasn't shameful, that it was human." The Tonight Show episode became legendary. It was studied in medical schools as an example of effective intervention. It was referenced in addiction counseling programs. It became a turning point in how America talked about alcoholism, not as a moral failing, but as a disease that required treatment and support. Dean Martin often said that October 15th, 1973 was the day he got his life back, the day his friend loved him enough to risk their friendship, the day he stopped pretending and started healing. Johnny Carson kept a photo from that night in his office. It showed Dean walking off stage with Dr. Morrison, Johnny's hand on Dean's shoulder. Underneath, Dean had written, "To the friend who saved my life, I love you, Pally." When Johnny Carson passed away in 2005, Dean Martin's children were among the first to pay their respects. They brought that photo with them and placed it in Johnny's casket. Because that moment, that intervention, that impossible bet with different rules, had given them 22 more years with their father. The bet Dean Martin made that night wasn't about drinking Johnny under the table. It was about whether Dean could find the strength to stop drinking at all. And thanks to Johnny Carson's courage, Dean won that bet. He won his life back. Sometimes the greatest act of friendship isn't making someone laugh. It's making them face the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's risky. Even when it means staging an intervention on live television in front of 15 million people. Johnny Carson once said the best thing he ever did on The Tonight Show wasn't a comedy bit or a celebrity interview. It was the night he stopped pretending and started saving a life. The night he made a bet with different rules. The night he showed America that love sometimes means saying the hard things, doing the uncomfortable things, and risking everything for someone who can't save themselves. Dean Martin's story became proof that it's never too late to change. That rock bottom can be a foundation to build on, and that true friendship means showing up, speaking truth, and never giving up, even when giving up would be easier. The intervention that shocked America became the intervention that saved a life. And in doing so, it reminded everyone watching that we all have the power to be that friend, to stage our own interventions, to love people enough to risk discomfort for their survival. Dean Martin bet Johnny Carson couldn't handle real drinking. What Dean didn't realize was that Johnny was making a different bet entirely. He was betting that Dean Martin was strong enough to stop, and Johnny won that bet. They both did.